Hi, welcome to SAP MM training. In this video, I want to set the expectations for this course. First, who is this course for? There are four different kinds of people who take this course. The first group is the fresher. So these are folks who come right out of college and then they don't have any experience, obviously. And there is another group who have some level of experience, but not necessarily in SAP. There could be a non-SAP consultant, non-IT or IT, doesn't matter. And another category is the SAP consultant. He or she is already an SAP consultant, but not an MM consultant. For example, he could be FICO or SD or CRM. And finally, we have another category called the end user. So these are folks who use the system. They are users of SAP systems, or they want to be users of SAP systems. It could be in any domain: MM, PP, SD, FICO, finance. This is a broad categorization on who can take this course. Now, in terms of what they need, these folks overall typically need three things. Number one, business scenarios. When I mean business scenarios, we're saying, for example, in SAP MM, what is a purchasing cycle? Who is a vendor? What is planning? What is MRP? How is invoices received? What is logistics invoice verification? These are all business scenarios. The second topic is end user transactions. Some examples of end user transactions could be how to create a purchase order, how to issue an output of a purchase order to a vendor, how to receive an invoice from the vendor, how to post it in the system, how to clear that invoice. These are all end user transactions. Simply put, this is how you execute a business scenario in SAP. The third thing, of course, is the configuration. In configuration, you learn how to configure the SAP system to suit the requirements of the business. Now, in terms of who needs what, a fresher who wants to be an SAP consultant would need the business scenarios because they're just fresh out of college. They wouldn't know how the material management procurement system works. So they would need to first be taught business scenarios. And of course, they need to be taught end user transactions. Because once you understand the business scenario, you need to be able to do that in the system. And on top of doing it, they also need to understand how to configure the system so that user will be able to do it the way they want it. So a fresher or an experienced consultant or an SAP consultant typically would require all these three different things. An end user, on the other hand, will need to know end user transactions and maybe business scenarios, but he doesn't need configuration. So this is the matrix of the type of people who can take this course and what they need. This course covers all the three pieces: business scenarios, end user transactions, and configuration. Why learn MM? Well, there are many different modules, right? There is SD, there is finance, there is CRM, there is SRM. So why learn MM? It's easy to learn. It's really, really easy. Compared to other modules, MM is really, really easy. There are some modules like GTS which are really shorter than MM in terms of scope. But if you take the core modules like SD, MM, FICO, CRM, MM is easy to learn. And of course, MM has plenty of jobs. Now, every company needs procurement. Even service companies need to buy. For example, take Deloitte. It's a service company, but it still needs to purchase. It purchases services, it purchases servers, it purchases rental space. Every company needs to procure. And procurement comprises of the bulk of MM, material management. Now, some companies also need inventory management and planning, and they're all part of MM. So the point being, all these business processes and especially procurement is fundamental to any company. It could be a small company, it could be a big company, it doesn't matter. It's fundamental to every company. So that is another reason why you got to learn MM, because every company requires it. So you're gonna always have your job. And who can learn SAP MM? Anybody. Anybody can learn SAP MM. There's no doubt about that. Anybody can learn SAP MM. You don't need to have a lot of experience. You don't need to code, or you don't need to understand complex languages like Java or ABAP. All you need is some common sense and willingness to learn. Now, how is this course taught? If you take a company like Starbucks, right? So this is the Starbucks angel or whoever. Starbucks has thousands of stores, right? I don't know how many thousands. Thousands of stores. And of course, it uses an ERP. Doesn't matter, SAP, Oracle, doesn't matter. It uses some kind of ERP. And it has a huge org structure. So there's a CEO, and then underneath that there are different functions, right? You know the drill. But if I want to start a coffee shop, right? Just one shop. I want to start a coffee shop like this. I'm the owner, so no org structure, no complicated things. How different is running this shop from running a coffee shop of Starbucks? I have to procure coffee beans. I have to store and manage the inventory, meaning coffee beans, creamer, milk, whatnot, any bakery items. I gotta do my HR. I might have 5 employees or 10 employees. Still, I need to do HR, right? I need to manage their payroll. I need to manage their promotions. I also need to do planning. I gotta plan the inventory very much ahead of time. Otherwise, I'll not be able to give them coffee. Starbucks also needs the same thing. They also need to procure coffee. They need to store and manage their inventory. They need HR. They need planning. Everything that I need. They just need it on a much, much larger scale. Thousands of times over. But the business processes very much remain the same. So I'm going to immerse you in the business processes that are required to set up a coffee shop, of course from a material management perspective, so that you understand things with a much smaller scope but covering all the business processes. That way, by the end of this course, we would have covered most of the business scenarios in SAP MM. The next thing that I want you to understand is the perspective that you should be taken when you're learning SAP. Typically, there are 2 different kinds of ways business transactions can happen. One is B2B, none other is B2C. B2B stands for business to business. B2C stands for business to consumer or customer. Let me give you some examples. If you're trying to buy coffee beans for the coffee grinder at your home,
or you need some flour at home, what do? You go to Amazon.com, say, or Walmart. You select your products, then you pay, take the bag of coffee, put it in your truck, and go home. Simple. So the process of buying coffee beans for home or for retail consumption generally is pretty simple. Imagine the same scenario happening in our coffee shop. My coffee shop, although small, is still an example of a B2B transaction. How does it happen? So there's this shop, there's a plant where pastry is being manufactured. So this is the factory, and right next to it there is a storage location where I store the coffee beans and whatnot. And this, of course, is the coffee shop. Somebody from the stores who's managing the inventory. So the store manager observes that the store is running out of coffee beans, say by the next 3 days, and he informs the shop floor manager. The shop floor manager is responsible for the overall operations, let's say. And he says, we are going to run out of coffee. The shop floor manager raises this to the general manager of the store, right? And the general manager is going to raise a purchase order. And this is going to go to the vendor. The vendor is going to send the goods, later an invoice, and somebody in finance is going to pay the vendor, right? So if you want to buy coffee beans, the process is just not that simple. This is just in a single coffee shop. So in contrast to B2C, B2B is complex. If buying coffee for a simple coffee store is as complex as this, imagine Starbucks buying 100,000 pounds of coffee. So this Starbucks, and they want to buy 100,000 pounds of coffee. What happens now? That's probably like $1 million, right? So step number 1, Starbucks is going to create a purchase order. Step number 2, probably there is a vendor screening process that happens, or pre-screened. So there's a process of vendor selection. And then step number 3 is budget. Somebody higher up in the chain is going to approve the budget. Number 4, place the order. Number 5 is goods received. Number 6, quality inspection is done. And finally, coffee is stored in the stores or in the warehouse. And then if one of the stores needs some coffee, then coffee beans is issued to that store. Let's say the store on Michigan Avenue. The process of doing all of this is complicated. There's a long decision making process. Whereas if you want to buy the same coffee for yourself, it's very simple, right? You're the approver. You're the QA. You go inspect the coffee for smell. You're the logistics provider. Meaning you take the coffee, put it in your truck or car, and you drive home, right? You are everything. You do all of that. In a B2B scenario though, there are different sets of people doing different sets of things, all to make this purchase happen. Another difference is in a B2B scenario, goods are paid after delivery, right? You know the process. A PO is raised to the vendor sends the goods, the vendor sends the invoice is paid. So there are 4 steps. So the goods are delivered, that's step number 2, and step number 3 or 4, it's paid. But in a B2C scenario, you pay before delivery. This is a typical case, right? Example, Amazon.com, Walmart. Swipe your card, put your card in, take the goods, and before you take the goods, you're already paying for it. There are some occasional usage-based scenarios in B2C, like Comcast or any kind of service where they won't know how much to charge up front. In that case, you pay after. So in such kind of situations, you're sent a bill later, after usage. Except for those usage kind of scenarios, for regular scenarios where the price is fixed, you almost always pay before delivery. So what's the point I'm trying to make? The point I'm trying to make is, if you want to learn SAP or any other ERP system, think from the perspective of B2B, because that's what these softwares are built for. B2C is served by different class of software. ERP software typically deals with B2B. And we'll talk about some of the scenarios where SAP plays a role in B2C situations. But for the most part, if you want to learn SAP, think from the mindset or perspective of a B2B. So what are the things that we have covered here? We have understood that B2B scenarios are complex. They're not as simple as buying coffee from Walmart. So it's a long decision-making process. It takes time. There are people identifying the need, there are approvers, and there is a whole logistics chain and finance involved to pay the goods. And typically, you pay your goods after you receive the goods. How do you install the SAP GUI? Your access provider will give you a dump of the SAP GUI. It's just a piece of software that you use to connect to SAP. Think of it like a browser. A browser to the internet is what the SAP GUI is to SAP. Just open that folder, double click on it, go to this folder, go to GUI, Windows 32, then click Setup, click Next. For practicing SAP MM, all you need is the SAP GUI. Click Next. If you're satisfied with the location, click Next again. And it's going to take a while. And it should be done in like 5 minutes. Close this. And your SAP GUI is ready. So the next step is you want to get connected to SAP. So it's like clicking your browser, opening it, and then typing in an address, right? Like Gmail or whatever. So the service that you want to connect to will be entered in the browser, right? So similarly, open the SAP GUI and click on this new icon. Click Next. And this is the screen where you specify the address of the service or the server that you want to connect to. For example, I want to connect to an ECC server. So just name it as ECC, and the application server is the exact location that you want to connect to. For example, if you want to connect to Gmail, you connect mail.google.com, or if you want to connect to CNN, you say www.cnn.com, right? So if you want to connect to your SAP server, you can either use a domain or an IP address. Example, in my case, I'm going to connect to a domain, ecc6.domain.com. This is just an example. So your service provider is going to give you the exact IP address of the domain. And you have to enter an instance number, and that will be given by your provider. The ID will also be given by your provider. So you need to enter these three pieces: ID, number, and an address. Click Next, Next, and Finish. This is the simplest way to connect to SAP. So click on Login. You put your user ID here and you put your password here. So that's my user ID and that's my password. Hit enter or click the green check mark. Okay, we are now logged on to SAP. Think of it. I don't want you to really understand everything about the SAP GUI at this point. As we start doing transactions, we'll start to know more about subtle things. Think of it like a browser. You move forward and backward in browser, right? You move forward in SAP GUI using transactions. And if you want to go back, there's a back button. The menu over here is very much like your Gmail list of links. You go to Gmail and say click on circles, anything with a hierarchical menu. So under circles, I have my family, friends, acquaintances, and following. If I want to see my circle of friends, what do? I go to circles, and then inside that I click on friends. Right? Simple. In the same way, if you want to look at a transaction, so this section here is called the menu path, and it's hierarchical, just like the way we have seen circles in Gmail. So if you want to execute a transaction, you got to first select what you're trying to do. Say if you want to create a purchase order, if you want to look at your circle of friends, you go to circles and then friends, right? So if you want to execute a purchase order, you want to go to logistics, material management, then go to purchasing, purchase order, and then create. So this is the transaction that you execute. It's just that there are more levels of hierarchy, nothing different. And don't worry about understanding all the levels right away. It's just not possible. You'll just see a pattern when you start doing things. Now if you go here, click on extras and click on settings, you'll see that each one of these transactions, for example, vendor supplying plan known for creation of purchase order, there is a technical name associated with it. It's also called as a transaction code. If you want to enable it, you go here and check on this option. So this is how you enable transaction codes or T codes. So check on that, click OK, and everything is going to collapse. And you start expanding the menu tree, and you're going to see the transaction codes. You see the transaction code here, ME21N. So the transaction to execute purchase order creation is ME21N. So this is an example of a transaction code or T code. So if you want to create a purchase order, there are two ways to do it. One is double click on this in the menu. The system will start to create the purchase order. You enter some details here. Another way to do the same thing is to go to this field over here. It's called the command field, and enter the transaction code there. What is the transaction code for this? ME21N, right? So this window is where you're going to enter the transaction code. I'm going to enter ME21N here. Put your cursor there, type in ME21N, hit OK. The same thing, right? You're again taken to the purchase order screen. So two ways to execute a transaction, one via the menu path and another via the transaction code. If you keep continuing to use the transaction again and again and again, you can drag the transaction to the favorites section. There are some other things that you need to know about the GUI, but we can learn about them as we go through the rest of the classes. Now we are going to talk about the purchasing lifecycle. I'm going to open this coffee shop, and right next to it I'm going to have a factory. I use this to make and store goods. I need this to run my coffee shop. I need some simple stuff like coffee beans, flour, sugar, and stuff like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find a vendor who can deliver this stuff for me. So I'm going to go to Google, find out who the nearest vendor is. say call him ABC Goods or ABC Foods. And I'm going to call him over the phone and say, I need flour, say 100 pounds. I need sugar, say 50 pounds. And I need coffee beans, say 20 pounds to start with. So this vendor is going to take some time to deliver the goods. Say in 5 days, he's going to deliver the goods. He's going to deliver flour, sugar, and coffee beans.